Well, welcome back to the brand new season of the Iowa Gravel Series Podium Podcast. I am your host, Chris McQueen, and as always, we have an amazing guest with us today. We have Michael Lambert, who I believe, of Wisconsin? We'll have to get into this, but did you grow up in Wisconsin, Michael?
Still living in Wisconsin, grew up in Wisconsin, yes.
Awesome. So the Iowa Gravel Series is getting, the broader and broader in its scope and reach, and we're inviting folks from all over the Midwest and world to come and race with us. And Michael, it was so wonderful having you at the Kelowna Horseshoe here just a couple weeks ago, the first Kelowna Horseshoe, and Michael took first place in the 100K. There's a fantastic photo on our Instagram and a couple places. It's shown up of him finishing the race with a wonderful bunny hop across the finish line. He has taken flight, and Michael, it is great having you here.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Glad to be here.
So, Michael, the format of this podcast is always like, okay, Chris doesn't know anything about these folks on the podium. On the podium, he should probably learn about it. And the only problem is I don't really do my research as we get into these. So I'm going to ask a whole bunch of naive questions. But I did take a moment to look at your Instagram, and we've had a brief chat ahead of time. So I'm excited to learn a little bit more about you, and as I'm sure is the Iowa gravel scene here. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about your path to cycling, and also a little bit about USA Cycling and what that means for gravel. But we'll get into that to it eventually. Let's maybe just start off with where you grew up in Wisconsin. Tell us a little bit about that and how you got into cycling.
Yeah, so I would say I took a sort of like non-traditional path into the sport. I was an athlete in high school, and then I really came to cycling kind of late. I was 27 years old when I did my first race, and I was a graduate student at the time. I was living in the state of Alabama. And so a friend of mine who I had met through sort of like the, through like the local cycling club, they would do like these really difficult, for me at least at the time, Tuesday night rides. And they had a large group of people that were really supportive, the Druid City Bicycle Club. And that's kind of where it all started for me. And this friend of mine encouraged me to go and check out this race that was in Louisiana. And that race is called Rouge Roubaix. It's sort of modeled after the Spring Classics. And it was 106 miles. And it was my first race. It was a USA Cycling like sanctioned event. Still is. They had a brief hiatus recently, but they came back. And I have just like an incredible story about that race, and that is sort of like my creation myth as a cyclist. So if you'll indulge me.
Yes, please. This is great. Go for it.
So yeah, this is 2016. I am a Cat 5. So if you don't know anything about the USA Cycling whole like hierarchy, right? You start at Cat 5 and you can work your way all the way up into Cat 1, Category 1, and that's like the closest thing to professional. And so you have to earn points to get these upgrades throughout. And it's one way of sort of splitting up the various skill levels and like fitness levels into, you can think of it almost like age group, categories. And so I'm at my first race as a Category 5, and it's 106 miles, and it's on mixed surface, right? It's like got big chunky gravel sections. This is again 2016. I knew, gravel racing was a thing at this time, but it wasn't such a huge focus in the US cycling scene. And so people that were winning Rouge Roubaix were racing it on road bikes with like 25 millimeter tires on these gravel roads, right? And so I go, and it was so exciting. It was so long. It was so difficult. And I wound up winning the race in a sprint in like the final 50 meters with one other rider. And I was immediately hooked, right? Like it was the most like profound experience. If you are at bike races and you just watch people, the Kelowna Horseshoe is a great example of this as well, right? You see people crossing the finish line and they are just bursting at the seams, trying to tell the story of their day, because you go through this whole range of emotions while you're out there doing this physically challenging, psychologically challenging thing. And so I won that race. I was going to school at Alabama at the time, as I mentioned, for creative writing. So I'm a writer. And after this race had taken place, I learned that they were having an essay contest. And I thought, this is too easy, right? Like, I'm going to be the guy that writes the hell out of this essay. I won this race. It was my first race. So I write the essay. I send it to the race organizers and I win the essay contest. So they give me free entry into the next year's event. And in that first year of cycling, technically, I think with USA Cycling's rules, you're not supposed to be able to move up multiple categories in 1 year. But I was doing really well. I was kind of a natural. And so I was, winning races. I moved up by the next year to category 3. Now, this race being in the spring, I'm training, all winter long, thinking about how strong these category 3 riders are going to be. These guys are monsters. There's no way I'm going to be able to do well. I really need to get fit. And so I'm training like crazy, riding, big miles on what was essentially a carbon fiber cross bike, a Trek Boon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was at this time that I also got my first set of carbon race wheels, which changed things immensely from my aluminum box clincher wheels that were pretty heavy, that weren't very aerodynamic. And so I've got all the equipment that I need. I go back to this race as a category 3, and I was solo for the last 32 miles. And I won, and I had to write another essay about this race, of course. But I thought that the chasing group was right behind me, essentially. The lead vehicle was telling me the gap. I'm on this section. I remember this moment. It was the low moment of my day psychologically. I'm on this block headwind section. I look down. I'm in my small chain ring. I'm just crawling. And I know I'm going to get caught and I'm going to crumple. And the guy tells me that I have 90 seconds of a gap. And there's 10K left or something like this. And so I'm thinking that my day's kind of over. And suddenly we take a corner. I've got a tailwind. I'm, doing 25 miles an hour. And when I crossed the finish line, I had a 4.5 minute gap to the next group, right? And so I think what had happened was I was catching some of the guys that were in the pro field that had gotten popped, that were, dangling. And I think I had a 90-second gap maybe to one of those riders who I had dropped. But I'm glad that he gave me a too small estimate as opposed to a too large estimate, because maybe I would have rested on my laurels instead of doubling down. But yeah, so I won this race solo the next year with this huge gap, wrote another essay, wanted to go back the next year and race in the pro category, and Rouge Roubaix goes on this hiatus. And so
was this COVID? Was that a COVID hiatus, or even before that?
I think it was just putting on a race is an incredibly complicated thing, right?
Yeah,
you have to get permits from the city, 106 miles of a race, right? It's all throughout this county. I think in Louisiana, they're not called counties. Actually, they're called parishes. So it was St. Feliciana Parish. So there was conflict with the community, and all of these complications led it to go on this 5-year hiatus. So I didn't get the opportunity to go back and do this third, right? From the bottom to the top, kind of winning along the way, right? My life goes through all kinds of changes. I'm living in Germany after graduate school. I'm racing in Europe. I have a really bad crash. I break my collarbone. I'm in the hospital for 10 days. Ultimately, I came back to the US, took a teaching job here in my hometown at my alma mater, kind of came full circle, and appreciated all that represented, right? It was exactly what I wanted to do at that time. And then I hear that Rouge Roubaix in 2022 is coming back. And so I know that I'm going to have to go back and race this race, right? First time back, now they've changed the course. It's 127 miles.
You're not.
And instead, I think because of the gravel like scene, the burgeoning scene, rather than having it categorized and maybe even now not sanctioned through USA Cycling, I don't remember exactly that detail, but they had a mass start, right? Everyone starts at the same time, 127 miles. Good luck. We'll see you at the finish line. And I'm riding to the start of this race. I've been training the whole winter, right? Just like before, thinking about this event. It's in the early part of the season. And I think I'm riding to the start, and I noticed that my shifting is something's wrong. At this time I had mechanical shifters, and it's not going down my cassette like cleanly. I know something's wrong. I think my cable is fraying. My cable's about to snap, and I like don't have time to fix it, right? I'm at the start line, and my team director is there. He's out on course, like at the feed zone. We go out, and I'm like, preparing to go into this first gravel section. We're at like mile 25. We have 100 miles to go. And because of this technical issue, I'm thinking I should go off the front while things are chill, get to the feed zone, and maybe I'll have time to fix it so that I'll be able to get back into the race and have a chance at this, right? Because like I know I'm not going to do well if my bike isn't working. So that happens. I go
little risky. I mean, you're gonna if you're gonna have to go strong off the front, you're gonna burn some matches there early in the beginning.
And that's what everyone is thinking as I go off the front solo, right?
Yeah.
This guy's crazy. This is a fool's errand. Why would we follow this guy? And so I go into the first gravel section solo. I come out. I'm heading towards the first feed zone. And I'm texting my director, right? I need a shift cable. Meet me at the feed zone. He's found a mechanic. He's found a cable. The guy's ready to change this thing out. Things are going smoothly. But I'm looking behind me and like no one's there. And it hasn't snapped, this cable, but it's not working right. I get to the feed zone. I've got like a 2.5 minute gap. And so I'm like, screw it. We're going to run it. And I didn't stop. I had him put the cable and some small Allen keys into a musette bag. So if it snaps, right, I can stop. I can like adjust the limit screws. I can get home. But I'm not going to let this gap go to waste. And kind of poetically, maybe, of course I'm biased, but the cable falls out of the bag, right? Like I'm putting all this stuff in my pockets. I drop the cable in the middle of the road, but I have the Allen keys. So if the cable snaps, I can turn the limit screws and I don't have to be in my longest gear, right? So this break gets up to like 4 minutes, and I am solo from mile 25 until mile 107. I have run out of water. Bert missed me at one of the feed stops. I'm like cracking big time. I go from like 300 watts average down to like, I'm sitting at like 250 watts. This is like just above zone 2 for me, right? Like clearly.
Which just drives me nuts because I know that my zone, the
Yeah.
250 watts is not my zone 2. That's like closer to my FTP. So I just to give some folks context, and if they haven't done much with wattage measurement, these are big watts, but still you're coming down in your power, and I know what you're competing against. That 300 400 watt averages for a time are a thing. So yeah, keep going.
Don't get focused too much on the numbers, Chris. It's okay. You're doing great. So yeah, I can tell things are going downhill. I get to this feed zone at mile 107. My director's there. He hands me a musette bag with like a can of Coke. It was like the best Coke I've ever had in my life. I'm enjoying this. I've got water now. And I hear the volunteers at the feed zone saying, "Do you need water?" And I'm thinking, I've already gone past these people. Like, who are they talking to? And all of a sudden I get swarmed, right? 3 guys have caught me. I throw the can of Coke back to my director and latch on to the group that had been chasing. So there's 3 of these guys. And in the third and final essay that I wrote about this experience, it's at this moment that something remarkable happens, which is my cable snaps. So now I'm in this chase group. I've been caught. I've been out front by myself all day, covered in dirt, right? The lead vehicle has been kicking up huge clouds of dust, as you know, as an Iowan. This is like a trademark of vehicles out on these roads. So I have it like in my teeth, right? Like I can feel it in my mouth. My legs are brown. My white socks on the fronts, right? Totally destroyed. And I'm stuck now in my longest gear, the 11-tooth cog on the rear. And I have my big and small chainring. My front derailleur is still working. And so the big climbs are behind us. I'm lucky. But I don't want the guys in this group to know that I have just suffered this emergency mechanical. So I'm kind of like hanging on, but I'm not really doing any work. I think that they are looking at me and they're thinking, well, that's okay. Like he looks pretty much toast, right? Like they're not threatened by my presence. I'm trying to hide the fact that I'm like pedaling with this glacially slow cadence anytime the road goes uphill and I'm in this ridiculous gear combination, right? You would never be in your small chain ring and in your small rear cog. This is like cross chaining, as they would say. It's not efficient, right? And I somehow managed to hang on, and I'm thinking, at least I'll get 4th place. All things considered, all this stuff that has gone wrong. At least I'll be able to get 4th place in this big race. That's good enough, I thought. And here we are coming into the finish. The finish at this race this year on this new course was like a big cradle. So we go downhill, and then there's an uphill sprint. Winning an uphill sprint with a broken shift cable in your longest gear is like unlikely. And I'm sitting 4th wheel of 4 riders coming into this finish. And there are 2 riders who know each other that are kind of drilling it on the front as we go down. They open up their sprint kind of early. I'm just tucked in. I'm in my longest gear, keeping up. I shift into my small ring and like kind of slingshot effect occurs. And I win the race with a broken shift cable. And that is like the most viewed YouTube video I've ever posted. It's got like 20,000 views. It's like a 30-second clip. I almost get run off the road by this guy and I win the sprint, right? You can't tell in the video that my shift cable's broken. And so it's an even better story. And so Rouge Roubaix, where I started, right? 2016, win it as a Cat 5. 2022, I finally win it in the pro category. And I did it with a broken shift cable. So that race to me just has this whole like rich history. And yeah, it's just a hell of a story. I'm sitting at the finish line just repeating the words unbelievable, unbelievable. Like I could not believe that had happened.
And you're there. I mean, you're the protagonist in this story. You're the one experiencing all of this, and even the unbelief to you. You're like, how does that feel? And this is I don't know if you've ever listened to like NPR. There's a podcast, How I Built This. And I feel like the cycling world needs like a How I Raced This. And there's a question that he always asks at the end where he's like, how much of cycling or how much of entrepreneurship, because he's always interviewing entrepreneurs, like how much of entrepreneurship is hard work and effort, and how much of it comes down to luck, at least the success in it. And you get a variety of different answers there. But I'll ask you that question, like when you think back to your journey from that first Roubaix to the second, and then that third final one, how much do you think luck and fortune and hard work and training and effort played into each of those races?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's kind of a both thing. It's hard to put like a percentage on it. Obviously, like preparation for an event like that is so important. You can't do it without that part of it, right? The hard work component. but you've got to have that and luck. I think it has to be both. I think that you can prepare all you want. You can have bad luck on the day, terrible luck, right? Changes the plan that you have, and you've got to be adaptable and kind of roll with the punches. I think there were moments where I could have said, well, my bike isn't working. Maybe I should quit. Maybe I should stop, do something different. And I think it took just like persistence and not giving up, even if I had the opportunity, like in that story, at the first rest station, right, to stop there maybe would have made more sense. But you've got to be, yeah.
So I guess, sorry, but looking back then, why not? Like, why didn't you give up? Like, what was it? I mean, there's plenty of very logical reasons to say, you know what, it's not my race. It's okay. Maybe I do this all too often. So I'm very familiar with this conversation that, I'll have a big effort and I'm like, you know what? I have other commitments, other things I'm doing. You know what? Today's not my race. I'm gonna like pull back or whatever. And I'm fine with that conversation for the most part. But you weren't in that moment. Do you reflect back why? Was it because of your previous experience and that success
Mm.
early on? Or was there something else driving you where you're like, no, like whatever it is, I'm going to push through. There is no this is not my day. I'm going to make this my day no matter what. Like
Yeah.
you know what that was?
I mean, radical self-belief. I don't know. I think like part of me is obsessed with the narrative that we construct, right? Like people talk about how deeply psychological these types of events are. How much of it is in your head, right? There's a joke about this in like the ultra endurance scene, which is that 90% of the race is mental and the rest is all in your head, right? Like, which is to say that it's all, right, a part of this psychological internal thing, as opposed to it being from without, right? This thing that occurs to you is something that you are actively participating in constructing. And so, yeah, like I could see myself even having handled that particular event like totally differently depending on the day and all the context of your life that you bring with you when you come into an event like that. So maybe you're right. Maybe it was the first race history, the experience of that, the confidence that comes with winning a big race. You can kind of lean on that experience in the future when things don't go to plan. But yeah, I think luck is a part of it too, right? Like my cable could have broken at mile 27 instead, and now my day is effectively over and I'd be scrambling. So
But
yeah,
instead, I mean,
but
instead
instead, yeah.
you had an amazing three-act play. That's what you had, right? I mean,
Mhm, mhm.
and that and I think you're so right about the narrative and and then the mental part of it. I was just with family this last weekend, and one of my nephews, he had a terrible accident a couple of years ago, and that left him as a quadriplegic. So he's
Mhm.
he's in a wheelchair. He has very limited mobility in his hands. He has a brother that it's just amazing, and they work. They're about a year apart, maybe 18 months apart, and they work very well together, and they support each other, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. And I was talking to Evan about like some of the challenges and things that he wants to do, and you know, where we left it is that, and I think he sees this, and he's got some really high lofty goals, but even though his body isn't available to do all that he wants, his mind is completely there.
Mm.
And because all of these challenges are, like you said, 90% in your head and the other 10% in your mental or whatever,
Yeah.
um, there really is nothing that stops you beyond that the decisions that we make in our life to say I'm gonna stop or not. And I think that story about the Rouge Roubaix and your experience in getting started there like really highlights that in such a beautiful way. And it's hard though, because when we're in the story, we don't see the third act usually.
Mhm.
We only see usually maybe the drama that we're in right now, and I think that's one of the harder parts. So, uh, stepping back a little bit from all of this, what have you found that you've done that's kind of helped you keep context within your training, within the hard day-to-day stuff, maybe even getting tactical? Like, what does your training routine look like right now? What are you doing to make sure that you put in the effort to overcome any sort of bad luck on that day? So tell me maybe a little bit about what how your training works and how you manage it, kind of the day to day.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to take one thing that you said in that question, and I'm going to sort of latch on to it. You wanted to zoom out, context. So going beyond even the cycling thing, where it all started for me really is a canoe trip that I took with my older brother. So this was in 2009, more than a decade ago. I was 21 years old. I took a semester off of college. My older brother and I, right, that connection, we got in a canoe just south of where we live on the Mississippi River, and we canoed all the way to New Orleans. It
Oh,
took us 66 days on the river,
how many miles is that?
1,468 miles. I still remember that figure, right? That's how deeply meaningful it was to me. It changed my life forever, right? And I think about things that I said to people after Rouge Roubaix that final time. I'm with some of the Velovit Club guys. We're hanging out at this Airbnb in St. Francisville, Louisiana, and they're asking me these types of questions. Right now, they're interested. How did you do that? And I told them, I think one of the reasons why I've had such a successful history at that race is because it's so deeply meaningful to me. It is along the banks of the Mississippi River, right? It's in the state that we were canoeing towards at this one moment in my life. And like that makes you so, I think, like strong mentally to have that past experience to lean on. So that was a difficult thing, right? Like it was something that I thought maybe we wouldn't be able to do. It was incredibly challenging. It was every day with someone in a tent on the river in a canoe. We got into fights, right? Like we had disagreements, but we had this common goal. And so that taught me so much. Flash forward to now, I have a coach. I've had a coach for the past several years. I train every day. Usually I take 2 days per week that are kind of like rest days, but I'm still riding like an hour on those days, easy, which is super important. I think like one of the pieces of advice that I give to young riders who are just figuring it out is to not forget that component. I think for me, when I was doing it by myself, it was easy to overtrain. Like it was easy for me to go on long rides. I loved that. I loved the feeling of like coming home totally spent and like eating my entire cupboard of food because food never tasted so good, right? Like you have this voracious hunger that you build from that type of thing. So I loved that. I had no issues like being motivated to push myself, but I needed a coach to help me figure out how specifically I should do that and how to rest also. That's like the part that I think gets overlooked.
Yeah. Well, it's so it's funny we talk about people who, I mean, you think about maybe in a finance set, sometimes we get in these habits where we'll spend every dollar that we have. And I feel like fitness in a lot of ways is that way as well. We start to build a little bit of fitness and then we spend it, right away because it's fun, it's exciting, we're doing new things. But
Mhm.
being able to bank that fitness, being able to rest, be able to kind of hold back a little bit, and also to um, kind of live on a budget so that you're not, you know, eating all that food at the end, but we're learning how to fuel along the way and teaching our body that yes, there's going to be fuel right now, so you don't have to freak out. Like there's going to be food, and so there's a lot of teaching your body that hey, you're in an okay place, so go ahead and keep building those muscles, keep building that strength and things is super important, and it doesn't come intuitively. And I haven't never had like an actual full on coach, but I appreciate the coaching and the routines and the folks I've worked with um to do that, because you just so quickly can lose what you've gained or essentially overspend and not really invest in a wealth of uh, fitness.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things, right? Like the science tells us having a coach will make you better, right? Just literally someone watching what you're doing will encourage you, motivate you in different ways. It's like having a workout buddy or something, right? You're going to be less likely to not show up. Um, and another thing I would say is that idea of having a budget and not spending all of the money you have. I would say that that's also useful in the race, right? Like learning to be patient. You might be feeling great. You're feeling like $1,000,000 at mile 5. How are you doing at mile 95, right? Like, are you still going to have it then? And learning how to be patient is super important in terms of tactics and all that other stuff. So.
All right. So moving kind of into the business side of this, and I like Michael, I would love if there's a way that we can figure out how to get you to do a blog post on the Iowa Gravel Series at some point. I love your storytelling. My undergrad is in English, but I don't get to use it quite as creatively as it seems like you get to do. So there's so much that I would love to learn and dip into. But one thing I wanted to talk about was USA Cycling and your experience there. We had a brief chat ahead of time about how cycling has changed, and you mentioned uh, being much more of a crit and cyclocross racer, and gravel is great and growing and exciting in the U.S., but it's hard when you maybe want to do those types of races, and there's just as many options or things. But I want to give you a little context about my experience with U.S. cycling, because of it was I started the I put on my first race in September of 2020. I announced
Mhm.
it like the first week in March
Wow.
of 2020, and then
What
the
a
second
time to
week in
be
March,
alive.
right? The second week in March, the whole world shuts down, and
Mm,
I'm like, no, I'm not canceling this ride. I've put too much effort into trying to figure out like how the heck do you do the insurance and like
mm,
organize and put together I put too much into it, and so uh, did that first race in 2020 of September, and then got done with that, and I was like, no, this is fantastic, I love this, but the only way to, I think, maybe to make it work is to do more. Like if it was just one race, it for me it was going to be much harder, and so I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a series. And fast forward a little bit, once the world started coming back to normal, USA Cycling starts saying, okay, well, we're going to get into gravel.
mm,
And I had some good, really great conversations with some great folks there. And the conversation kind of ended when I basically said, they asked, they're like, hey, would you be interested in doing more with USA Cycling? And my response, for good or for bad, was like, my audience isn't like my racers aren't asking me to do that.
mhm,
And that response, I stand by it right now, but it is something that I reflect back on more with like, okay, is there something more that the grassroots gravel world should do more with organizations like USA Cycling? It's hard because there's this tension between the two groups and what they're trying to do. But as we look at the Iowa Gravel Series in terms of having several races, being kind of a similar format, consistently across the board, we're looking at adding points and things like that. I'm starting to think like, what does what does that mean to be grassroots and to do some of these things that are very racer focused, not necessarily just strictly community focused, and how would that maybe relate to US cycling? So with
mm.
that context, I guess my question is, if you do you think every race should be USA Cycling, and if so, why? And if not, what are some good reasons in your mind why something should not be sanctioned? Like, give me kind of your view from it as someone who has excelled and gotten a lot of motivation from this categorized style of writing that has
Mm,
helped you have this beautiful story
mhm.
of going from Cat 5 to Pro, and seeing the value in those experiences. So I'm curious what you would teach me, what thoughts you have there.
So to preface my response, I have to mention the fact that I have never organized an event myself, right? I don't have that perspective on things. I think you could teach me a lot from the things that you have learned as a result of having done this. From my perspective as a rider, I can totally see the benefit of having sort of like a structure and organization. The categorized system, as you mentioned, right? Like really, I think was a benefit to me because it prevented me from having to race against the fastest people out there on my first day, right? That was, I think, a huge plus for me as a rider. Um, However, I can also see there being a ton of benefits to having the freedom to not have to adhere to a set of regulatory, right, like rules and guidelines that a governing body that doesn't even maybe know who you are, or right, they have nothing to do with rural Iowa gravel, yet they want to tell you how you ought to do your event, right? Like I can see that being not that useful also. um, to add to that, right? Like my most recent race, I had a chance to go to USA Cycling's US Pro National Road Race for the first time. And here is a little seed of a story that I think exemplifies the wrong-headedness that I think is the reason why some people are critical of governing bodies in general, like the UCI or like USA Cycling. So I'm wearing an ice vest. I'm in Charleston, West Virginia. I'm at the starting line of the biggest race that I've ever done in my life. This was less than a week ago. This was on Sunday. It's Wednesday. This was on the 19th of May. I'm wearing this ice vest. I'm wearing my team jersey underneath of the ice vest, but it is the Wisconsin State champions version of my team jersey. So it's white. It's got this blue stripe on it. It has the Wisconsin emblem from their flag.
It's on the VeloVit_elite Instagram page. It looks great. I'm looking
Go
at it
check
right
it
now.
out. It's a beautiful jersey, right? I was
Yeah,
so
yeah.
proud to represent my home state at this event. I was so stoked that my team like helped construct this jersey for me. It's the first time I've gotten to wear a state champions jersey in a race, and at this type of race, it was just like an incredible experience, right? So I'm taking this ice vest off, and there's this guy who knows who I am. I think he was a director of a different team. I'm not going to say the name of the team, but he asks me, "Is that jersey UCI compliant?" And I'm thinking, are you serious? Like I don't know. Are you about to break out the rule book? Is this where your head is at? Like here I am at the start of this huge event. You're worried about whether my jersey is rule compliant. That to me is the reason why people dislike regulatory bodies. They're worried about maybe the wrong things, you know? So yeah, I get it. Like I get why people are critical of things like USA Cycling. I think in some cases it's a necessary, right, like institution in that they can provide structure and right rules for things. But yeah, I get kind of both sides. So
Yeah, yeah. Now that I think that's a good example of like, all right, what does cycling mean to folks? And to be fair, cycling means a lot of things to a lot of people, as it should. It's one of the most it's I think what makes it so beautiful about being on a bike is because it can be as fast as you want, it can be as slow as you want, it can be as challenging as you want, it can be as uphill or as flat, it can be as communal or as solo. Like you it's I think just the closest, in a lot of ways it's the most human tool that we have for transportation that gives us all the efficiencies that we can without getting straight up into motors and stuff. And people who love e-bikes, I love e-bikes as well. I know there's an e-bike in my future at some point, so nothing against that by any means. And so yeah, I think about where the gravel series, the Iowa gravel series is going, and what we want to do in the future a lot. And so I appreciate kind of that input there, or that idea is like, how do we maybe encourage and even partner or do whatever we can to bring the best parts of cycling to the forefront, try those, use those. And if it makes sense to work with organizations that have those structures, maybe. If it doesn't, you know, for the most part, I think what we're trying to do is make it, our mantra has been, let's have a great day in the saddle. Like that's the point of it. And for folks that really want to be on the podium and they're excited about that, we hope that we provide it. And for those who like, no, I just want to go to the coolest, interesting, weirdest parts of Iowa,
Mhm.
then yeah, let's go and do that. Tell me a little bit of before probably should wrap up here a little bit, not because I want to, but because of like the limitations of time. Um,
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about Velovit and how you've gotten involved with them and what they're doing as an organization.
Yeah. It's a wonderful team. It's a wonderful group of human beings, basically my involvement with them got started way back in Alabama. It is based in Jackson, Mississippi. That's kind of home base for them, though we have riders spread out all over the US. So, I told you about the Druid City Bicycle Club, this local cycling club in Tuscaloosa. And I had actually a former student. He showed up in this scene. I'm a graduate student teaching English classes at the university. Um, he and I would go to battle every Tuesday. We would throw haymakers at each other until one of us gave up, basically. We got so strong. It's the benefit of having like fast people that you can ride with, that you can push yourself against. His name was Davis Adams, and Davis is now graduated. I think he's just recently passed the bar exam. He's a lawyer. He's doing great. Uh, I don't think he rides his bike much anymore, but that's maybe something that he will come back to in the future. But basically, Davis raced for this team. When I came back from Germany, he asked, if I had anything lined up, if I was joining a team. And he knew who I was from that experience on Tuesday nights. And so he got me onto this team, and I've been with him since 2020, since COVID years. And they have a pretty big footprint, I would say, in like the Southeast in particular. And especially with the club part of the team, they're getting people on bikes. They're providing them with a community. That is a huge component of what you can grow out of, right? Like you're welcomed into this community. You don't really know what you're doing. I think of that Druid City Bicycling Club when I didn't really know anything about like how to ride in a pace line, about what was the appropriate sock height. Just kidding. It doesn't matter what length of sock you wear. But I learned so much, and
As
I
long as it's
needed
not an
that.
ankle sock, right?
As long as it's not an ankle sock, yeah. I mean, maybe the knee highs are something that we could talk about more. But anyways, that community aspect of it is so important. And I think without that, you don't get the elite riders. So I think that speaks to one of the things that's so important to gravel racing too, which is like all comers, right? Like everyone, please, like no matter what your level of participation or interest, you have a place here. I think that is like so necessary, like fundamentally, to the sport growing and like being a place where people feel like they belong. So yeah, Velovit is great. Like we have this elite team now that is going to like the biggest events in the US. We have like a domestic elite team license, which gave me access to compete at pro nationals. We are going to have like a full squad at Tulsa Tough, which is like, they call it Critmas, like a spin on Christmas. It's where everyone goes. It is like the World Series of crit racing in the US. And so we are bringing a full team there. I won that race. We as a team won that race last year in the category 1-2. And that was like the biggest thing I'd ever done on the bike for sure. Just incredible. And the level is extremely high. Literally, like guys from all over the world come to that event. There was like a German team. It's truly like international in scope.
Wow.
Kind of like gravel racing, right? Crit racing is also a sort of specifically American thing. And so this is a huge event. And I couldn't be more stoked about like how that team has supported me and helped me grow as a cyclist.
Oh, awesome. Very cool. Yeah, that community is a huge aspect of it. And however you find it, there's plenty of different groups, I think, for that. But finding the team that helps you develop in the goals that you want to have or inspires you to where you want to be I think is so important. You can find that in a lot of different ways, but the goal is to find the thing that you're like, this is what I want. This is what's taking me to where I want to go. That's pretty
Yeah. I think it always for me has come back to the people, right? Like surrounding yourself with people that support you and that you can work together to reach your goals. Like, thinking about even like at the height of competition, I'm in this US pro road race or whatever, right? And I'm racing against guys that I have known for years. And it's like, it's competitive, right? Like we're racing against each other. But beyond that, we're like human beings that support each other in a lot of ways. So remembering that maybe even in the heat of the moment, competition is good, pushing each other, right? That's all what it's all about. But there are bigger things than bike races too. And it's like remembering that to be a good human being to one another is, I think, even more important than any bike race.
right. You got to be build that human inside of you, and do the right things and build those relationships and that love, even if your jersey isn't sanctioned, right?
Even
Despite
if,
even
even if, even if your
well,
socks are the wrong height, you are still a human being underneath of the socks.
yeah,
Yes.
focus there. Well, Michael, this has been fantastic. I really, really, really need you to come back and race with us again so we can put you on the podcast again because I would love to keep chatting with you. But let's go ahead and wrap up for tonight. Thank you again. Is there anything that you would really encourage people to go and look at right now? Anything you're like, hey, if one thing to maybe go promote or say, hey, go check this out.
If you are racing gravel in the state of Iowa, you have to go to 2 events. The first event is Core 4 that takes place in Iowa City. That's August 17th. If you haven't heard about it, you gotta start paying attention. It's a big one. It's going to be amazing this year. They do a great job of organizing that event. It is just incredible, beautiful parts of Iowa. And a little bit more off the beaten path. If you haven't heard of this race, Colesburg in Colesburg, Iowa, check that out. Tons of climbing, really beautiful, maybe parts of rural Iowa that would surprise you. And both of those events are on my calendar. I'd love to see you out there.
I'm so glad you promoted both of those. Matthew Fassbender, who does Colesburg. Oh no, he does Drift.
He does
Maybe I'm getting
Driftless 100.
He does
It's
Driftless
Ross and
100.
Sunny.
Ross and Sunny,
Ross
yeah,
and Sunny that do
fantastic
Colesburg, yeah.
human beings. And then I know Nate Colbom and a bunch of people are involved with Core 4. Nate came in second at Kelowna.
Yep.
These are absolutely fantastic events. I moved one of my favorite events from the Iowa Gravel Series. It's Pisgah, the Soldier Cutoff Hill Duro earlier in the month so that we could make room for things like Gravel Worlds and Core 4. So you can do all of these if you want. So thank you so much. I wholeheartedly agree. Those are fantastic events to go be part of, and so cool to hear that you're going to be there. So I hope folks sign up so they can go race with Michael Lambert and give him a hard time on whether his jersey is sanctioned or not. All right. Thanks so much, Michael. We'll chat again with you soon.
Thanks, Chris.